That is the problem with government. They make every problem they try to solve worse. But what's even worse than that is that the problems they're trying to solve, generally they created. So government creates a problem. Like, look at what they're doing now. I was just listening to some politicians this morning talking about the student loan problem and all these student loans. They're trying to solve that problem. Well, the government created that problem. Students wouldn't have loans if it wasn't for the government student loan programs. Colleges couldn't charge such high tuition if the government didn't loan all these money to the kids to bid up prices. The government created that problem. Before the government got involved in college, it wasn't that expensive. You didn't have to borrow money. My father grew up in a lower middle, upper lower class family. His father was a carpenter. He had 7 sisters. His father had no money. My grandfather had no money to send my dad to college. My dad didn't have any money, so he had a summer job waiting tables. That's all it took. He didn't borrow any money. He paid for tuition, room and board, got an accounting degree, and he just worked as a waiter over the summers. And most of his friends, there used to be an expression in America, I'm working my way through college. Okay, people work their way through college. Now they borrow their way through college. And when they graduate, they got a mountain of debt. Right? And now the government, oh my God, students have so much debt. We need a government solution. No, we don't. It's a government created problem. We need a free market solution. We got to get the government out of higher education. We got to get the government out of student loans, whether it guarantees them or makes them directly. There can't be any more money loaned to anybody to go to college. We need to force colleges and universities to cut prices. Why would they cut prices now? The kids got all this government money to pay whatever price they want to charge. Bring some free market forces into college. Can you imagine if everybody got government loans to buy cell phones, how expensive cell phones would be right now? Why are they so cheap? Because the capitalist system brought the price down. You don't get a government loan. So wherever the government is involved, same thing with healthcare. Why is healthcare so expensive? Because the government plays such a big role. So wherever you see high prices and or low quality, it's because of an excessive government involvement. And the only solution is to get government out so that free market forces can come in. The government is creating the crises. It's like they light a fire and they say, okay, see, now we'll put it out. We'll protect you from this fire that we lit. I do believe that government is a necessary evil, but the problem is sometimes, it becomes too big a burden that the negatives outweigh the positives. And that's pretty much the case. Governments can add to the overall well-being and prosperity of a society if they stick to their limited mission of protecting individual liberty and private property. That's it. So if they can create an environment where I'm more likely to keep the fruits of my labor, then I'm going to labor harder and produce a bigger bounty of fruit from which everybody can benefit. That's the beauty of capitalism. I don't get rich unless I enrich other people in the process. But when the government gets so big that the harm that it does outweighs the benefit that it provides, well, then it's time to get rid of the government, right? That's what the founding fathers said, right? You have to dissolve the government when it becomes so bad. Unfortunately, we're way beyond that point. If you go back to the American Revolution and look at what King George was doing in England, what he was doing is nothing compared to what we're doing to ourselves. King George, in his wildest imagination, wouldn't have even conceived of the IRS. He wouldn't have conceived of an income tax. The founding fathers objected to a sales tax on tea. Can you imagine how much they would have objected to an income tax? What if the colonists had to go around keeping records of everything that they spent and all their deductions, and they had to come up with a tax return and send it over to King George? How long would that have lasted? There was only about 1/3 of Americans that were in favor of the revolution. If King George had an income tax, everybody would have been in favor of the revolution. There would have been no holdouts. So, we've already gone way beyond what King George did. Any of the founding fathers were alive today, they would be leading the revolution to overthrow the government we have right now. When you compare the US tax rate to most other countries, if you live in most countries, your national tax rate is your tax rate. Most cities don't impose another tax. So Americans, you may say, oh, we have a 37% tax rate in America. Well, if you live in Florida, what if you live in California? What if you live in New York? Now you're looking at the high 40s. And then what about the Obamacare, 3.9% tax? Throw that on. So there are a lot of Americans living in some high tax states that are north of 50% of their income in tax. Now that doesn't even count what they pay in property taxes or sales taxes or stuff like that. So when you compare the marginal income tax rate in America to Germany or France or Japan, you got to add in those local taxes, state and local taxes. Even New York City imposes its own city income tax on residents. So you live in New York City, you're paying federal tax, state tax, and city tax. And by the way, they can't deduct those taxes anymore. I mean, there's a $10,000 cap. It used to be unlimited, but that changed under Trump. So that made those taxes an even bigger burden because they're no longer deductible against your federal tax. You just add it right on top. So I think America is one of the highest taxed nations in the world on a marginal tax break. Now, we do have ways to avoid that, right? Like we have the carried interest. If you're a hedge fund manager or private equity guy, you don't have to pay that top rate. You can pay capital gains rate. But most people aren't able to take advantage of that carried interest tax loophole, which was, by the way, preserved in the Inflation Reduction Act. They made sure to take care of the hedge fund and private equity billionaires. They didn't want to go after them, but they got 87,000 IRS agents to go after the middle class. Even though we're one of the most heavily taxed, we're not taxed enough because we're running $2 to $3 trillion a year budget deficits. So that's how much higher taxes would have to be if the government was fiscally responsible. They would have to pretty much double our tax rates in order to collect all the money that they're spending. But the real measure of taxation is spending. Every dollar a government spends is a dollar the public is on the hook to pay. And so in reality, the way we're paying for these budget deficits is with inflation. So inflation is actually a tax. It's a tax on the public to provide for government spending. So you have to add all these big price increases to your income tax and your property tax to see how much you're paying in taxes. So if your grocery bill and your rent and your food bill, if you're paying an extra 10 grand a year, more than you were paying last year, that's just 10 grand in taxes. That's really all it is.